Hi, welcome back to my analog guide, episode 2. If you haven't watched episode 1, I'll put a link somewhere around here. In episode 1, I talked about some film photography basics like white balance and ISO, and of course the different types of cameras you can work with, like point and shoots, TLRs, SLRs. Today I'm going to continue with the different film stocks you can use, the different developing methods, pricing of course, and last but not least, my recommendations. So thank you very much for tuning in, and I'll hope you have fun. So let's talk about the different film stocks that are commercially available, and probably the most well-known type of film stock is C41 process film stock. It's the typical color negative film stock. Color negative means that you get a negative after developing it, which means that while scanning this frame, you have to invert the colors that you get a normal looking picture. The thing about C41 processed film is that there are a lot of options to choose from, like Kodak Gold, Kodak Color Plus, Portra, Ekta, the Fuji stocks, and so on and so on. So you have a real big variety of films you can shoot, and they're quite easy to develop. So there are like nearly no labs that don't develop C41 stocks. It's just the most well-known type of process and probably the most used developing process if people don't shoot black and white. And black and white has its own process. Back in the day, there were black and white positive film stocks, but sadly they aren't produced anymore as far as I know. So we just stick to the black and white negative. Negative, as the name suggests, is the same like color negative, only just in black and white, so you have to invert the black and white image to get the real deal. A thing to look out for when shooting black and white is the different color renderings of the film. Of course, it's black and white, so every color is gray in different shades, but the black and white stocks vary how they render the gray. So there are panchromatic and orthochromatic black and white stocks, which means they have different levels in the black and white rendering of the original colors. So for example, you have a black and white stock that is more sensitive to red, or a black and white stock that's more sensitive to blue. That means the red elements in the frame are getting brighter with a red sensitive stock, while with a blue sensitive stock, the blue elements get brighter. Yeah, that's a thing to look out for if you want to shoot black and white. Continuing with E6 processed film, like Kodak Ektachrome, Fuji Provia and Fuji Velvia, which are all slide films, also known as color positive films, which just mean they get developed and you already see the picture, so you don't have to invert it. These stocks really create beautiful colors and you can create gorgeous pictures with them. But to be honest, I can't really recommend these film stocks to a beginner or someone who's starting with film photography because first of all, they are quite expensive. Like Kodak Ektachrome is the most expensive Kodak film stock out there. And secondly, the stock isn't very forgiving, which means if you over or underexpose it a little bit, the frame is ruined really fast. So not really a beginner-friendly stock also. The development is a little more tricky because there aren't that many labs that do E6 processing in comparison to C41 or black and white. So that's another issue with that. And last but not least, a film that is quite hyped at the moment, which is motion picture stock, which means it's respooled film that is used to make movies like Oppenheimer or Kinds of Kindness. And these films are respooled in film cartridges, so you can shoot them in your 35mm camera, for example. So the thing with motion picture stock is that it has an extra layer in it. So there's the anti-halation layer, which prevents light spilling, halation. And pre-processed films like Cinestill 800T or Double Film Cinema or Reflex Lab 800T. These films are all based on Kodak Vision 3 500T, so the companies take the motion picture stock, remove the anti-aliasing layer and put it in a cartridge so you can shoot it. The other way of shooting motion picture stock is just shoot the real motion picture stock. So you have to develop them in different chemicals than you normally would because of the anti-aliasing layer that's still in the film. So you have to put it into ECN2 chemicals. The problem about ECN2 is that there aren't a lot of labs that are doing that. I put a link into the description where 35mm Dealer, a small respooling company from Germany, made a list with different labs that are providing ECN2 development. So if you're interested in shooting motion picture stock, then take a look at that document. Visit the shop by 35mm Dealer. I bought way too much film over the years from him, but yeah. What I really enjoy about motion picture stock is that it has I don't like the word, but it has a cinematic quality to it. Well, I mean, it's made to shoot movies, so it should look like a movie. But the thing is, it's, first of all, the price point. Yes, ECN2 development is more expensive than C41. But on the other hand, Kodak Vision 3 is a really beautiful, fine-grained film stock, kind of like Portra, but a lot more cheaper. So take that in consideration while thinking which stock to shoot, because motion picture stock is more difficult to handle, but it's cheaper than most of the professional film stocks that you can buy. Also, what I find really intriguing is the discontinued motion picture stock, so expired film. Because Fuji used to produce motion picture film as well, which they sadly don't do anymore, but you can buy these older motion picture stocks from Fuji as respooled film, so you can shoot them, which is quite nice actually, because I personally love the colors that Fuji produced with those stocks, and yeah, I'm a big fan of that. And of course, as I just mentioned, shooting expired film, which has its benefits, but it also has its quirks, because film can go bad, just like milk and anything else. It takes a lot longer. And the thing with expired film is always a little bit of a gamble, because you don't know how the film was stored. If it was stored in a fridge or a freezer or in any dry and cold place, it might be quite fine, but it might not. So you don't really know what to get out of a roll if you just shoot it. And the other thing is that film loses its sensitivity to light over the years. So the rule of thumb is that for every decade the film is expired, you add 1 stop more light while shooting. So for example, I shoot a roll of ISO 400 film, but it's expired for like 10 or 11 years, so I give it 1 more stop. So I shoot it not at box speed, I shoot it at ISO 200, so it has 1 more stop of light. It's a rule of thumb. It doesn't always work like that, because it depends on the film and how it was stored. But if you want me to go deeper into expired film and how I shoot it, just let me know, because yeah, I gamble a lot with expired film. Let's talk about the elephant in the room, pricing. We all know film isn't cheap, and it won't get any cheaper over the next years probably. There are 3 points when pricing comes into film photography. First of all, you have to purchase the film, which can set you back between $5 to $25 per roll, depending on the film stock you want to shoot. The cheapest film stock I know, which produces great results as well, is Fomapan, which is a black and white film, which costs around $5 to $6 per roll. Then after you shot the roll, you have to develop and scan it. There are many options to do that. The first one is to go to your local market. That's what I did with the first rolls that I shot. You have to look around a little bit, because not every market provides a lab service. They aren't that expensive, not really cheap, but I mean, it's a fine price, but you can't expect really great results from doing that at a local market, because they just send it to a big company that are doing all the films for those markets, and they're just doing their job. So they develop and scan your pictures, you get them back, and that's it. So there's no one sitting there taking a look at your photos again, thinking, okay, it's a little bit more underexposed than it should be, it's a little more green than it should be. and there's no one correcting it. So I started with the local markets, and after that I tried out 2 different labs. Yeah, the second one was kind of perfect for me. And yes, labs are more expensive than the local market, but to be fair, they put a lot more work and effort in the scanning and developing. So some labs even provide creative input on their website, or you can write them a mail or stick a post-it to your film to say what you would like to have while they scan it. So that's really nice, and yeah, the scans just come out a lot better. And shipping my film to my lab is the way I go for several years now, and I definitely don't want to go back. The other way you can develop your film is by doing it yourself. There are a lot of different options out there, so there are developing kits, different developers from Ilford and ADOX and so on, and they all tell you which film should be developed in which temperature and for which time and so on and so on. So if you just follow these steps, you shouldn't really mess up your film. I don't really have experience with that, so I'm just telling you what I know. And the same goes for scanning, so you have 2 different options. First one is to let the lab do the work. That's what I do mostly, and yeah, I'm quite happy with my lab. So it's a little trial and error, so you have to find your lab that fits your style of shooting and does it right for you. But to be honest, the second lab I tried was the right one for me, so it wasn't that hard. The other way to do it is home scanning. You can do it with a scanner like an Epson or with your camera, which is the way that I do it. I actually bought the Digitalizer Plus by Lomography, so I can rescan any pictures if I want to. It's just the classical camera scanning setup. So you have your camera, you take a picture of the negative, and after that you have to fix it in Lightroom or Photoshop or Capture One, whatever your platform of desire is, so that you get the normal looking picture out of it. It's a little fiddly. There are plugins that make it more simple, like Negative Lab Pro. The other way is by using a scanner like the Epson scanner. In the end, you have to decide which workflow is the one working for you. As I already said, there are different types of films. So far I talked about 135, also called 35mm film, and medium format, aka 120 film. But there's also 110 and large format. So starting with the smallest film format, which is 110, it's the equivalent of 60mm motion picture film, which means it's quite small, quite grainy, but the cameras are really small as well, so yeah, they're great cameras to put in your pocket, walk around with them, maybe take holiday pictures on them and so on. They're like the point and shoots, but even smaller. For example, I myself have a Minolta Autopack, which is this camera here. As you see, it's smaller than my hand, so the form factor of these cameras is just amazing. Picture quality is of course not the same as 35mm because the film is so much smaller. As an alternative for a point and shoot to travel around with, both are actually cool cameras. The other issue with 110 film is that there's only one company that I know of who still produces 110 film, and that's Lomography. They're doing a great job with it, but of course, only having one company, you're quite limited by the film stocks. There aren't a lot of. That's another thing to consider. And the other problem is many labs don't scan this film because it's so small. So a friend of mine whose pictures you just saw shot 110 film once, but our lab didn't scan them. So I had to scan them on my scanner at home, which worked. But if you don't want to do that, you have to ask at your lab or look for a lab who states they are doing 110 film. So one step bigger, we have 35mm film, which is like the golden standard of film photography. There are a bunch of different cameras to choose from, a whole lot of film stocks, and nearly all labs that are developing film are able to develop 35. So you really have big set of choices right in front of you and possibilities, which makes 35 really the easiest way to shoot film. Actually, another thing that's quite interesting, at least for me, is half frame, which means you don't get like 38 or 36 exposures in one roll, you get 72. So of course, because it's only half of the frame, the resolution is smaller. I used the Olympus Pen EES, which is a half frame camera, during a holiday, and I was blown away by the photos. I decided to use a Kodak Portra film stock, which is a little more expensive but more fine-grained. So I had smaller grain on the smaller frames, which work perfectly with this camera. Yeah, I love half frame for holidays because you have so much more room to work with one roll, and that's really nice. But moving on to the next bigger film, which is 120 or medium format. Actually, the photography world with rolls, how we know it now, started with medium format. After that came 35. And there are many cameras out there as well to choose from when shooting 120. The resolution you can get out of 120 film is a lot higher than 35. And 35, comparing it to our digital cameras, is already quite high. It's an amazing medium to capture details, for example in portraits or in landscape photography, but it's also more expensive. Not the film rolls themselves or the development, but you pay the same price for a 35mm roll in development as for 120 roll, but from a 120 roll you normally only get 12 frames, comparing that to 36. Actually, the number of photos you can get out of one roll depends on the camera you're using, because different medium format cameras have different aspect ratios. So for example, the Rolleiflex that I showed you or the Hasselblads all have a 6x6 frame, so a 1:1 aspect ratio, so you get 12 frames out of one roll of standard medium format film. While for example the Vogtländer Besser has an aspect ratio of 6:9, which means I only get 8 pictures from one roll of medium format. So that's another thing to consider when buying a medium format camera, if you want to have that boxy aspect ratio of a Hasselblad, or if you want to have a more wider aspect ratio from one of the older cameras like the Vogtländer Besser or the Agfa Standard. And last but not least, the best way to drain your bank account, large format. Large format comes in different sizes, so the smallest large format size you can normally buy is 4x5, which is insanely big compared to medium format, which is insanely big compared to 135. First of all, the film is pricey as hell. Second problem is there aren't that many labs that are developing large format, so you have to take a look at those, or you're home developing. And the other thing is the cameras to use are quite big and heavy, so it's not like an easy travel camera setup to work with, and the shot setup takes a long time as well, because you have to frame the picture first, you have to put in the film holder, and you have to work with a jacket or a blanket or something to cover the focusing screen on the back of the camera so you can see your frame. So it's a really difficult workflow, but a really special one as well, because as I said earlier, you take more time to composite a frame when shooting analog, and the time you put in a frame of large format is something else. And as I said, 4x5 is the smallest large format film. There's also 8x10 and so on, so you can really spend a small fortune on purchasing those film stocks. It's something really special to work with and to shoot, but you really have to want it. So to finally wrap it up, what would I recommend to a starter? It's actually quite simple. If you never shot film before or just want to get into it, I can only recommend to buy a point and shoot, or ask around your family. Maybe some of your family members still has a old point and shoot lying around that they don't need anymore. And considering the film stocks for a beginner, if you want to shoot color, I can only recommend Kodak Color Plus or Kodak Gold. And if you really don't care about color, so you just want to shoot a cheap film, you can't go wrong with Fomapan. It's insanely cheap considering its quality. Agfa APX is really a good film as well. I still shoot it today and I love it. Ilford has some great films as well, even though they are a little bit pricier than Agfa and Fomapan. But black and white film in general is a lot cheaper than color film. And if you're already an analog shooter who's thinking about trying a new camera or a new film stock, a new film format like medium or large format, just go for it. So, to wrap it up, thank you very much for watching. If you really kept on going until now, I really appreciate it. And I really hope that you took something home from that video. Maybe you learned something new or you're motivated to try something else in film photography. And yeah, if you enjoyed this video, please consider liking and subscribing. And if you have like any suggestions or topics you want me to talk about, please let me know in the comments. I really hope to see you next time, and until then, take care, more pictures.